When a black man walks into an upscale bank, the manager tells him to wait, then makes him wait 2 full hours while attending to others. What she doesn't realize is who he is. The moment the board members arrive and greet him with respect, her world turns upside down. The sun had barely crested the downtown skyline when James Ellison stepped out of his sleek black Mercedes-Benz S-Class, tailored navy blue suit, freshly pressed, leather shoes gleaming, and a folder tucked neatly under his arm. The air carried the scent of brewing coffee and ambition as early commuters rushed past. But James moved deliberately, unbothered by the world's pace. He looked up at the modern glass and stone facade of the Hamilton Trust Bank, an upscale financial institution. Nestled in the heart of the business district, Han gave a small nod before walking in. Inside, the branch radiated affluence, pristine marble floors, brushed gold accents, and the low hum of hushed conversations. A large chandelier hung from the center, as if to remind every visitor of the bank's wealth and prestige. As James approached the reception desk, a young white woman with perfectly styled blonde curls looked up from her computer, her polite smile slipping ever so slightly as she took him in. "Good morning," James said with quiet confidence. "I'm here to meet with the branch manager regarding a private banking matter. I believe her name is Patricia Langston." The receptionist glanced at the clock. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, already assuming the answer would be no. "It's a walk-in," James replied, "but I was told she handles high-value portfolios. I'd appreciate a few minutes of her time." She hesitated, eyeing his designer watch but also his dark skin, then forced a corporate smile. "Please have a seat, and I'll let her know." James nodded and took a seat on the soft leather couch in the corner of the lobby. As he settled in, his eyes scanned the room. A middle-aged white man in khakis and a golf shirt was immediately ushered to a teller window. A young white couple walked in, holding hands, and were quickly greeted by another banker. James waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. At the front desk, the receptionist whispered something to Patricia, a stern-looking woman in her mid-50s, wearing an expensive blazer and a cold expression. Patricia didn't even glance at James. Instead, she waved dismissively and turned to type on her computer. The receptionist came back to James. "Ms. Langston is finishing up with a few clients. She'll be with you shortly." James nodded. Suppressing the irritation that flickered behind his calm demeanor, he understood exactly what was happening. Patricia had made an assumption, and now she was acting on it. He didn't look like her idea of someone who managed significant financial assets. She likely saw him as someone walking in off the street with questions about checking accounts or overdraft fees. The irony was sharp, but James kept his composure. Another client walked in, a white woman in yoga pants, with a designer handbag. Patricia sprang from her desk to greet her personally, offering her a drink and disappearing into a private office together. James exhaled slowly. 35 minutes. On the far side of the lobby, a young black teller named Malik watched the situation unfold. He'd been working at the bank for just under a year, fresh out of college, and though he'd already witnessed subtle forms of bias, something about this felt especially blatant. He watched Patricia ignore James, and he saw how James didn't even flinch. That calm confidence had intrigued him. He wanted to say something, to do something, but he also knew his place in the hierarchy. Speaking up might put his job at risk. And besides, what could he say? "Hey, maybe you shouldn't ignore the only black man in the lobby. That wouldn't go over well." So Malik kept quiet, stealing glances when he could. An hour passed, then an hour and a half. James checked his phone once, noting the time, but making no motion to leave. He simply sat, poised and patient. At one point, Patricia passed near him and gave a tight smile, saying, "Thank you for your patience. We're just very busy today." She didn't stop walking, nor did she ask for his name. James gave a polite nod but said nothing. Inside, he was documenting every moment, every delay, and every face. The final 20 minutes dragged as he watched client after client be served before him, each one of them clearly receiving the red carpet treatment. At exactly the 2-hour mark, James stood and walked to the reception desk. The same young woman looked up, now visibly uncomfortable. "Is she available yet?" he asked, his voice steady. The receptionist swallowed. "She's still in with a client, but I can let her know you're still waiting." James nodded. "Please do." Then he turned and walked back to the couch, opened his briefcase, and removed a folder with several sheets of paper. He placed them neatly on the table before him. The logo of Hamilton Trust Bank gleamed in the corner of the documents. At exact moment, Patricia's door opened, and she emerged, laughing with the white woman in yoga pants. She patted her arm and handed her a bottle of mineral water before escorting her to the exit. As she turned, she finally looked toward James again, the hint of a sigh escaping her lips. "Mr. she asked, clearly not remembering his name. "Ellison," James replied. "James Ellison. Right. Well, I apologize for the delay. We've just had a very busy morning." "What can I help you with?" she said curtly, still standing. "That's all right," James said, standing as well and gathering his documents. "Actually, I'm here for a scheduled visit. It's just that you weren't informed of it yet." Patricia blinked. "Scheduled?" "Yes," James replied. "I represent the Regional Oversight Committee. We're conducting surprise visits to evaluate customer experience, managerial conduct, and operational integrity at key branches. I was sent here today." For a moment, Patricia looked stunned. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. I wasn't told." "You weren't supposed to be," James said. "That's the point of unannounced assessments. I would have introduced myself earlier, but I was interested in seeing how your staff handles unrecognized visitors. The results," he said, picking up his folder and stepping forward, "have been enlightening." Before she could respond, the glass doors of the bank opened again. A group of sharply dressed men and women entered, their presence commanding. They walked with purpose, exuding authority and professionalism. Every head in the lobby turned. Receptionists stood up straighter. Malik froze mid-transaction. Patricia stared. One of the men, a tall, silver-haired executive in a navy pinstripe suit, smiled when he saw James. "James," he said, striding forward with a hand extended. "Glad to see you. We've all just arrived for the board review." "Perfect timing," James replied, shaking his hand. The group of executives turned toward Patricia, offering nods of greeting. "You must be the branch manager." The woman next to the silver-haired man said. "Yes," Patricia said, her voice barely audible. "Patricia Langston." "Great, James has already filled us in on some of the preliminary observations," the silver-haired man continued. "We'll be using your conference room if that's all right." Patricia looked as if the ground had been pulled out from under her. Of course," she stammered. James gave her a calm smile. "Shall we?" he asked the group. As they walked past Patricia toward the back, Malik caught James's eye from across the lobby. For the first time all morning, James smiled and gave a single, deliberate nod. The atmosphere inside the bank shifted like the tide, as the group of sharply dressed executives followed James Ellison through the corridor, leading to the conference room. Behind them, Patricia Langston stood frozen at her desk, lips slightly parted, her posture rigid, her brain working frantically to comprehend the implications of what had just unfolded. She had just spent the past 2 hours, subtly though, unmistakably disregarding the very man who now walked arm in arm with the most powerful figures in Hamilton. Trust Bank's regional leadership. Her stomach turned. The receptionist beside her shifted nervously, her screen still open but her fingers frozen above the keyboard. Malik, the young black teller, stared in wide-eyed disbelief, then slowly turned his gaze toward Patricia, who refused to meet his eyes. Behind the frosted glass of the executive conference room, voices began to murmur. Documents shuffled, and Patricia's anxiety grew with every muffled syllable. She rushed to her office, closed the door, and pressed her hands to her temples. She thought back to every moment of that morning, every decision, every delay, every time she had chosen to prioritize a different client over James. She had offered water and warm welcomes to women with designer bags, given cheerful greetings, 2 men in polo shirts, and offered not so much as a handshake to the man now commanding the full attention of the board. Her mistake wasn't just professional, it was personal. And now, it was public. Inside the conference room, James Ellison sat at the head of the table, a spot typically reserved for the regional director. But no one questioned his placement, not when they all knew who he was and why he was there. The silver-haired man to his right, Mr. Danforth, chairman of the Regional Operations Board, looked through the folder James had prepared. "This is damning," he said, frowning at the log James had meticulously compiled. Every minute of delay, every client who'd been prioritized over him, every subtle gesture and dismissive glance. James had even included security footage, times pulled from the publicly visible cameras in the lobby. Footage he had the authority to access through his corporate credentials. 2 hours? Asked Ms. Chu, one of the senior regional analysts, incredulous. "They made you wait 2 full hours without even checking your name." James nodded. "I recorded the exact timeline. I've included not only my own observations, but notes on how other clients were treated during that period. I also observed the behavior of staff, particularly a young teller who seemed to notice the discrepancy but remained professional throughout." "And Patricia?" Danforth asked, folding his hands. James paused. "Never once asked my name until the very end, and when she did, it was with hesitation. She dismissed me multiple times while greeting other clients personally. She failed to offer a single courtesy. No water, no update, no access to a private office. I was not seen as valuable until others validated my worth." A tense silence followed. The board members exchanged glances, the weight of James's words hanging in the air. This wasn't just about one poor decision, it was about systemic bias. It was about how perception influences treatment, about how assumptions lead to exclusion. Danforth leaned back in his chair. "We've been trying to improve our day numbers for years, and this is the kind of behavior that undermines everything we're trying to build. It's not just a reputational issue," added Ms. Koo. "It's legal risk. If a journalist had witnessed this, or if Mr. Ellison weren't one of our own, this could have been a PR disaster, or worse, a lawsuit." James didn't speak immediately. He allowed the weight of their concerns to settle. Then he finally said, "I don't want to punish for punishment's sake, but I do want accountability, and I want to use this moment to push change, not just reaction." Danforth nodded. "Understood." He stood. "Let's bring her in." Outside the room, Patricia sat at her desk, palms sweating, breath shallow. When the receptionist approached with a message, they'd like to speak with you now. Her heart dropped into her shoes. She straightened her blazer, checked her reflection in her monitor, and walked the longest 20 feet of her life. As she entered the conference room, the air felt 10 degrees colder. Everyone turned to look at her. James remained seated at the head of the table, calm and composed. She forced a smile. "Thank you for taking the time to meet," she began, her voice brittle. "Before we begin," Danforth interrupted, "we'd like to hear your account of how this morning unfolded." From the moment Mr. Ellison entered the bank, Patricia's smile faltered. "Of course, he arrived without an appointment, and I was handling other clients at the time. I asked the receptionist to inform him there would be a wait. I wasn't made aware of his role with the company, or I would have expedited his visit." "You told him to wait," Ms. Koo clarified, "and then didn't ask his name for 2 hours. Patricia's voice trembled slightly. I was trying to manage several things. There were a few high-value clients that required attention. "So, you assumed Mr. Ellison was not one of them?" Danforth asked. Patricia's eyes flicked to James, who remained silent. She stammered, I didn't mean any disrespect. I just didn't realize that's the problem," James finally said, his voice quiet but powerful. "You didn't realize, because you didn't care to ask. You saw me, made an assumption, and that assumption governed your behavior." The room went silent again. Patricia's hands trembled at her sides. "I understand that mistakes happen," James continued, "but this was not a mistake. This was a reflection of bias. Whether conscious or unconscious, it dictated your professionalism, or lack thereof." Patricia opened her mouth, but closed it again. There was nothing she could say to undo what had been done. James continued, "You are in a position of trust. As a branch manager, your behavior sets the tone for your team. If you treat people based on surface-level judgments, you enable your staff to do the same. And that is something this organization can no longer tolerate." Danforth looked at Patricia. "You'll be placed on immediate administrative leave while we conduct a formal review. Further decisions will follow based on HR's findings. You are not to communicate with staff or return to this branch until notified." Patricia's face turned ghostly pale. "Administrative leave," she repeated softly. "I have been here for 15 years, and perhaps that's part of the problem," Ms. Koo said bluntly. "Complacency, entitlement, and a lack of accountability." Patricia's eyes filled with tears, but James did not gloat. He did not smile. He simply said, "Dismissed." Patricia turned and left the room, the door closing behind her with a soft but final click as she disappeared down the hallway. James turned to the board. "This branch has potential. The staff, for the most part, was professional. I'd like to highlight the behavior of the young teller Malik. He showed awareness, restraint, and integrity. I recommend he be considered for leadership development." Danforth nodded. "We'll make it happen." James stood. "Let's draft a regional memo. Use this incident as a teaching moment, not a scandal. Acknowledge what happened, and make it clear that change is coming. Then back it up with training, outreach, and leadership accountability." The group agreed, energized by his clarity. For a man who had just been humiliated in public, James had every right to be angry. Instead, he chose precision, progress, and purpose. Back out in the lobby, whispers had begun to spread. Staff murmured among themselves, curious about Patricia's sudden disappearance and the presence of so many top-level suits. Malik remained quiet, but his eyes never left the conference room door. When it finally opened and James stepped out, heads turned. But James didn't rush or make a show. He simply walked over to the front desk and thanked the receptionist. Then he turned to Malik. "Do you have a moment?" he asked. Malik blinked. Yes, of course." James nodded toward a nearby office. "Let's talk." Inside, the 2 men sat. James folded his hands on the table. "I watched how you handled yourself this morning. You noticed what was happening, didn't you?" Malik hesitated, then nodded. "I did. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to help, but you stayed composed." "That matters," James said. "Integrity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's the decision not to play along." Malik sat straighter. "Thank you, sir. How long have you been here?" "Almost a year." "What's your career goal?" "Honestly," Malik hesitated, "I want to move up. Management. Corporate, maybe, but I didn't think it was realistic." James smiled. "We're going to make it realistic. You're going to join our Emerging Leaders program. Full mentorship, training, career guidance." Interested, Malik's eyes widened. "Yes, absolutely." James extended his hand. "Then welcome aboard." As the rest of the board exited the branch and returned to their cars, James lingered for a moment in the lobby. The staff watched him now, not as a stranger, but as a leader. And while many of them felt shame, others felt something else. James turned back one last time, looking around the room that had once ignored him. Then, with the same calm he'd entered with, he walked out quietly, but with the full weight of authority in his stride. 3 weeks later, the Hamilton Trust branch looked and felt like a different place. The marble floor still gleamed underfoot, and the chandelier still shimmered overhead. But something intangible had shifted. Something cultural, something rooted in accountability and a new sense of vigilance. A plaque near the entrance had been quietly updated, replacing Patricia Langston, branch manager, with acting manager Darnell Rivera, a respected veteran of the company known for his inclusive leadership and ethical rigor. The staff had been through a whirlwind of sensitivity training, leadership workshops, and one-on-one meetings with regional executives. Every employee had been required to complete implicit bias training, and all branch managers in the district were now subject to randomized customer experience audits, an idea proposed directly by James Ellison himself. While the corporate world had not publicized Patricia's removal, the message had spread internally like wildfire. Blind discrimination had a cost, and silence had consequences. Yet it wasn't just fear driving the shift, it was inspiration. James's conduct had resonated far beyond the walls of that single branch. Word of what happened had filtered through conference rooms and corporate retreats across the region. Executives who had once viewed diversity as a checkbox now saw it as a living standard. They saw what leadership looked like under pressure, measured, wise, uncompromising, and they were forced to ask themselves if they were living up to that standard. James Ellison returned to the branch under a different pretense now. He didn't walk in as a mystery shopper or a hidden evaluator. He entered through the front doors with open authority. His ID badge clipped neatly to his jacket, greeted immediately by the new manager and staff who now understood exactly who he was. A few employees stood up straighter at their desks. Others offered small nods of acknowledgement, part respect, part apology. James greeted them with calm professionalism. He wasn't there to gloat. He wasn't interested in rubbing salt in old wounds. He was there to oversee follow-ups and to ensure that what Petra had been initiated wasn't a temporary gesture but the start of permanent change. Malik, the young black teller, now wore a crisp shirt and tie instead of the bank's standard uniform. He had been formally promoted to a junior associate role under the Emerging Leaders Program and was now shadowing managerial staff, working directly with Rivera on operations and strategic planning. James found him near the back office, going over loan documentation procedures with another associate. Malik stood when he saw James. "Mr. Ellison," he said with a wide smile. "Please, call me James," he replied, clapping the young man on the shoulder. "How's it going?" "Better than I could have imagined," Malik said. "I've learned more in 3 weeks than I did in an entire year here." James nodded with pride. "That's the idea. Growth is the best answer to disrespect." The two men stepped into a side office to talk privately. James listened as Malik shared his aspirations, his plans to one day run a branch of his own, perhaps even build new community finance initiatives to support underrepresented neighborhoods. James took mental notes, offering guidance and encouragement, but also challenging Malik to think bigger, broader, beyond the glass ceilings others might try to impose. "Don't let anyone tell you where your ceiling is," James said. "Let your integrity be the thing that builds your floor. Everything else, you climb." Malik absorbed every word, deeply aware that he was speaking not just to an executive, but to a living example of what was possible. When their meeting ended, James exited the office and rejoined Rivera for a tour. Rivera, though new to the branch, had already begun earning the trust of the staff. Under his leadership, the culture was shifting from silent complicity to conscious inclusion. "There's still some tension," Rivera admitted, as they walked past the rows of desks. "Change like this makes people uncomfortable, but discomfort is where growth lives." "Exactly," James agreed. "Let it stay uncomfortable for a while. It means people are listening now." Later that day, the bank held a scheduled town hall meeting with staff, something James had insisted on. Instead of a dry HR seminar, it was a raw, authentic dialogue about race, equity, and professionalism. James stood at the front of the room not as a disciplinarian, but as a storyteller. He shared what it had felt like to sit in that lobby for 2 hours, invisible to those around him, while holding in his briefcase the authority to change careers with a single sentence. He talked about how racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it whispers through delay, shrugs, and indifferent smiles. He didn't shame anyone by name, but his message was clear. Every moment of indifference is a choice, and every person in the room has the power to choose better. Staff asked questions, some genuine, some defensive. One employee raised a hand and asked, "What do you expect us to do when we're busy and people just walk in without an appointment?" James didn't hesitate. "You treat them like human beings. Ask for their name, offer a seat, keep them informed. It costs nothing to lead with respect." Another employee asked how to deal with unconscious bias when it's so deeply ingrained. James's answer was both gentle and firm. "You can't control every thought, but you can control your actions. Bias may be natural. Disrespect is a decision." After the meeting, employees lined up to speak with him individually. Some apologized, others expressed gratitude. One longtime white employee admitted, tearfully, that the experience had shaken her. "I never thought of myself as biased, but I see now how much I take for granted." James simply nodded. Awareness is the beginning. Change starts with seeing. As the day wound down, James sat once more in the same leather couch where he had waited weeks ago. This time he was joined by Rivera and Malik, who sat beside him as equals. Funny how full-circle moments work, Rivera said. Yeah, Malik added, but the difference is now, everyone knows your name. James smiled, looking around the lobby. It's not about knowing my name. It's about knowing that anyone who walks in here could be someone with power, value, and worth. Even if you can't see it yet. Rivera nodded thoughtfully. We've still got work to do. We always will, James said. But this is how it starts. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with presence, with accountability. And with someone willing to sit still long enough to make people see what they didn't want to. Weeks turned into months, and under Rivera's leadership with James's continued mentorship, Malik rose quickly. By the following year, he was transferred to another branch as an assistant manager. Staff retention improved. Customer satisfaction scores rose. Other branches followed suit, creating ripple effects throughout the company. But perhaps the most telling sign of change came one morning when another black man walked into the same bronze jeans t-shirt, no appointment. The receptionist stood, greeted him with a smile, and asked his name. She offered him a glass of water and assured him someone would be with him shortly. He blinked, surprised by the warmth, but accepted the offer. From the side office, James Ellison observed, a quiet smile touching his lips. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Change had arrived, not with fanfare, but with consistency. James stepped out into the sunlight once again. His role in this chapter? Complete. He had come in as a stranger, been treated as a nobody, and left having reminded everyone who he really was, not just by title, but by character. And while Patricia Langston's name was no longer on the wall, her mistake had built a platform for something better. Because when people in power misuse it, the best response isn't revenge. It's transformation.